In Cleveland, Ohio, a series of disturbing events unfolded at 12205 Imperial Avenue, thrusting the city into the national spotlight. The investigation began on October 29th when Cleveland police responded to a report of rape at the residence of Anthony Edward Sowell. What initially seemed like a routine investigation took a sinister turn when authorities discovered the remains of multiple victims inside Sowell's home. This grim discovery shocked the community and launched a meticulous investigation into the actions of the man who would become known as the Cleveland Strangler.
What happened in this house behind me is simply a nightmare, and there are a lot of deeply disturbing questions for authorities here. There were 6 bodies found in this house last week. This morning, we know there are more.
We discovered 4 additional, what we believe to be 4 bodies.
Police believe that they were murdered by this man, Anthony Sowell, a convicted rapist who had been living in the house.
It appears that this man had a insatiable appetite that he had to fill.
5 of the bodies have been identified as women. Police say they were strangled.
I didn't feel safe. There's something telling me don't go in this house.
One woman says she narrowly avoided being a victim.
How he was in love with me, how he wanted me to go up to his house and drink with him.
Sowell was a registered sex offender, and this tragedy raises questions about how closely he had been monitored by police.
Probation and parole is not really set up to be a law enforcement outfit. They're not set up to do the type of surveillance and supervision that might catch somebody like this guy.
The search of this house will continue. Chris, there could be still more bodies here.
Pierre, thank you. Thank you for the reporting.
As law enforcement officers painstakingly combed through the evidence, the full extent of Sowell's crimes began to surface. The case of the Cleveland Strangler would captivate the nation, shedding light on the horrors that can lurk behind closed doors and the tireless efforts of law enforcement to seek justice for the victims. To comprehend the depths of the Cleveland Strangler case, it's imperative to delve into the troubled past of Anthony Edward Sowell. Born on August 19, 1959, in East Cleveland, Ohio, Sowell's upbringing was marred by instability and adversity. Growing up in a dysfunctional family environment, Sowell experienced abuse and neglect, laying the groundwork for his descent into criminality. After a brief stint in the United States Marine Corps, Sowell's life took a dark turn with a conviction for rape, leading to his discharge. Over the years, Sowell's criminal record expanded, with convictions for various offenses, including assault and attempted rape. Despite periods of incarceration, he struggled to break free from the cycle of violence, leading to a life marked by brushes with the law. By the early 2000s, Sowell had become a familiar figure in the Mount Pleasant neighborhood of Cleveland, where he resided at 12205 Imperial Avenue. Despite his reclusive nature, neighbors and acquaintances described him as unpredictable and volatile. As law enforcement dug deeper into Sowell's past, a troubling pattern of behavior emerged, characterized by escalating violence and aggression. It all began with the disappearance of Tonia Carmichael, a 53-year-old grandmother. Her family's concern turned to despair when her remains were unearthed from Sowell's backyard. Strangled to death, she was just the beginning. Hannah Culver, 31, met a similar fate, her body discovered alongside Carmichael's. Like the others, she had been strangled and bore signs of a violent struggle. Talacia Fortson's disappearance went unnoticed initially, but her tragic end was revealed when her body was found hidden in Sowell's home, a victim of both strangulation and prolonged torture. Nancy Cobbs, 43, added to the grim tally of victims, her remains showing signs of brutal mutilation. Imelda Hunter, 47, met a similar fate, her body discovered buried in the same backyard graveyard. Crystal Dozier, 38, and Michelle Mason, 45, followed, both strangled and buried in the depths of Sowell's property. Kim Yvette Smith, 44, joined the tragic list of victims, her discovery sparking renewed community outrage and efforts to bring Sowell to justice. Janice Webb, 48, LaShanda Long, 25, and the last victim, who we should name if there is a name, rounded out the horrifying saga, their bodies found buried, marking them as yet more casualties of Sowell's ruthless rampage. With each discovery, the community recoiled in horror, realizing the extent of Sowell's depravity. But as the victims were unearthed one by one, so too was the determination to see justice served for Tonia Carmichael, Tishana Culver, Talacia Fortson, Nancy Cobbs, Imelda Hunter, Crystal Dozier, Michelle Mason, Kim Yvette Smith, Janice Webb, LaShanda Long, and the 11th unnamed victim, whose lives had been brutally taken. Sowell's method of operation was characterized by a combination of coercion, manipulation, and extreme violence. He targeted vulnerable women, often preying on those who were struggling with addiction, homelessness, or other personal challenges. Sowell lured his victims to his residence under the guise of offering them shelter or assistance, exploiting their desperation for his own twisted purposes. Once inside his home, Sowell would subject his victims to horrific acts of violence and degradation. He would overpower them, rendering them helpless before subjecting them to sexual assault and torture. Many of his victims were bound and restrained, unable to escape as Sowell carried out his sadistic fantasies. The precise details of Sowell's crimes are too gruesome to recount in full, but forensic evidence revealed a pattern of extreme brutality. Many of his victims were strangled to death, their bodies left to decompose in various locations around his residence. Some were buried in shallow graves in the backyard, while others were concealed within the walls or floors of the house itself. In addition to strangulation, Sowell's victims suffered a range of other injuries indicative of prolonged suffering and torture. Evidence of blunt force trauma, stab wounds, and signs of struggle were common among the victims, painting a chilling picture of the horrors they endured at Sowell's hands. Perhaps most disturbing of all was the post-mortem treatment of the victims' bodies. In a macabre display of depravity, Sowell engaged in acts of necrophilia and dismemberment, desecrating the remains of his victims long after their deaths. These gruesome details underscore the depths of Sowell's depravity and the sheer horror of his crimes. Following the shocking discoveries at Anthony Edward Sowell's residence, law enforcement agencies faced immense challenges in their pursuit of justice. The investigation into the Cleveland Strangler murders presented a daunting task, compounded by the vast scale of the operation and the need to piece together fragmented evidence from multiple crime scenes. Detectives and forensic experts worked tirelessly to analyze physical evidence, including DNA samples and fingerprints, in hopes of identifying the perpetrator. Meanwhile, officers conducted extensive interviews with witnesses and followed up on leads to narrow down their search. Despite numerous obstacles, law enforcement remained committed to their mission. They conducted door-to-door inquiries and utilized advanced forensic techniques to gather crucial evidence. Finally, on October 31, 2009, their efforts paid off when Sowell was apprehended just 1 mile from his residence. Anthony Edward Sowell's crimes sent shockwaves through Cleveland and captured the attention of the media nationwide. The graphic details of the Cleveland Strangler case dominated headlines, sparking fear and outrage within the community. As news of the murders spread, residents grappled with fear and uncertainty, questioning their safety in the wake of such brutality. Anthony Edward Sowell's arrest marked the beginning of a legal battle that would captivate the nation. As the prosecution presented evidence linking Sowell to the crimes, his defense team worked tirelessly to challenge the allegations and cast doubt on the case against him. Sowell's defense attorney strategically questioned witness testimonies, challenged forensic evidence, and sought to undermine the prosecution's narrative at every turn. On the other side, prosecutors meticulously presented a mountain of evidence linking Sowell to the murders, including DNA evidence, witness testimonies, and forensic analyses. They painted a picture of a calculating and remorseless killer, leaving little doubt as to Sowell's guilt. Despite the defense's efforts, the weight of the evidence proved overwhelming, and the jury ultimately found Anthony Edward Sowell guilty on multiple counts of murder and other charges. The prosecution's case had prevailed, and justice was served for the victims and their families.
The man convicted of killing 11 women got on the stand this afternoon in a bid to save his own life. In a statement to the jury here in Cleveland, Anthony Sowell said he was sorry for what happened. We now have Tracy Carlos's report.
For the first time today, Anthony Sowell, who's been sitting in a Cuyahoga County courtroom for weeks, broke his silence. And he told the jury he had a terrible childhood.
I was hit with a cane, broom.
And who are the people that would
Both my grandmother and my mother.
The same jury that convicted Sowell of murdering 11 women will now decide whether he lives or dies for his crimes. Today, in a 30-minute unsworn statement, the 51-year-old told the jury he was sorry.
The only thing I want to say is that I'm sorry. I know that might not sound like much, but I truly am sorry from the bottom of my heart.
For the victims' families, it was not enough. Barbara Carmichael's daughter, Tanya, died at the hands of Sowell.
I couldn't help it. When he said that, I'm sorry, I just couldn't take it. You know, I was sitting up there thinking it's bad to say, only if he had died when he had the heart attack in '07, my daughter and a lot of these other girls would still be living.
Anthony Edward Sowell met his demise on February 8, 2021, while incarcerated on death row at the Chillicothe Correctional Institution in Ohio.
Also making news today, the Cleveland Strangler is dead. Anthony Sowell, the convicted serial killer and rapist, died at an end-of-life care unit in Columbus yesterday. It was a story that shocked Northeast Ohio and the nation when 11 women's bodies were found in his house on Imperial Avenue in 2009. Our January Keaton is live there where his house once stood. In January, how are the victims' families remembering and reacting?
Well, it's been a mixed bag, bittersweet in both sides of that arena. As you see, I'm at 123rd and Imperial Avenue right now at the site, as you mentioned, of the home where Anthony Sowell took those 11 women's lives. Now behind me, you can see a memorial is erected for those women. And as you mentioned, it's some closure for the victim's family, but bittersweet. 51-year-old Sowell, he died in prison Monday of an unspecified terminal illness. He was sentenced to death back in 2011 after 11 women's bodies were found buried and displayed on his property on Cleveland's Imperial Avenue. Florence Bray's daughter, Crystal Dozier, was his first known victim. She tells 3 News that Sowell's death has brought her a sense of peace.